Welcome to the Divorce Matters Podcast, where we teach you how to survive the family court system. We will give you no-nonsense, straightforward strategies for getting you an equitable outcome. We guarantee you won't hear this advice anywhere else. A reminder that we are not attorneys and this is not legal advice. However, we will help you more than any attorney ever will. And now, here's your hosts, Michael Alexander and Mark Fidelman.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Divorce Matters. Today, I welcome a friend, somebody I've been talking to for the last 6 months, somebody who has had their kids taken away, from what I can tell, illegally. No surprise to a lot of you listening to this. So we're going to get into that, and we're going to talk about what happens or what you should do if your kids have been taken away from you, especially with false charges and with judges that aren't acting judiciously or legally. And we're going to touch on that, and we're going to give you some ammunition that you can use up front. Neither one of us are lawyers, so this isn't legal advice. We're just sharing his experience and my experience and others' experiences that I've talked to, and I've talked to a lot of people. So with that, Kenneth Rosa is our guest today, and I want him to start with his background first, and then we're going to jump into his case and his situation.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Kenneth Rosa. I'm currently with the Fathers' Rights Movement. I've been there for probably about a year now. Most of the content you see on their central Facebook page and things, a lot of that content comes from me. It's been a learning experience as we went, and we have trial and error to do this, but the main goal is to help fathers that are struggling like the rest of us to realize that they're not alone and that there is a brighter day coming, because the fatherly suicide rate is so high after these divorce proceedings that we go through, where moms gain custody of the children 83% of the time. So my personal story is that I was a father. I was a good father until the court said I wasn't a good father. That happened in 2015 into 2016. And so I was kind of blindsided, because we all expect the good old American justice, American flag, and then you go to a family court and you expect no bias or discrimination. And then when you actually go through these proceedings, it's very eye-opening and downright scary if you are a father. And sometimes now we're seeing non-custodial mothers. So that's kind of my background and a little bit about me.
Okay, so let's dive a little bit into your situation and talk about, why the court took your kids away, what happened, and I might stop you along the way, because I want people in this similar situation to know, hey, if Kenneth could go back in time, this is what he'd do differently. So why don't we start with that?
All right. So I was with my second ex-wife for approximately 13 years. We were married for, roughly 7. I went on a float trip with my kids, came back to a cleaned out house and divorce papers. So long story short, she found somebody just a little bit uglier than me and decided that was the road she wanted to take in life, which is fine. For the first 10 months of our divorce, I was very amicable in trying to litigate it, as I was using her attorney. I didn't hire an attorney. I was just agreeing to total split of the property. And what I wanted was 50% of the time with my children. I mean, I have a God-given right to just as much time as she does. I'm not a convicted felon. I'm not been convicted of any misdemeanors. I don't have any domestic violence convictions. And so therefore, what reason would a court to have to keep me away from my children? When we went to our about 10 months of the divorce proceedings, there was an incident that happened that I had filed for full custody of both of my children. They were being harmed when they were on mom's parental time. So for 10 months, we did every other week, 50-50. And then at 10 months, one of the kids told me something that was very harmful to them, in the fact that my 12-year-old daughter had some naked pictures taken of her while she was at mom's house by a family friend. So that being stated, DFS got involved, things like that. It's very hard to prove those type of allegations for just pictures and things of that nature if you don't have the actual device they were taken on. And so I had filed for full custody of both of my kids. When the paperwork was filed, approximately 4 days later, I was served with a ex parte, which is temporary, and then you get a hearing to go to a full restraining order hearing. So upon being served with that, we went to the hearings. The ex-wife stood up there and told the judge why she wanted it. And what she told the judge was that now mind you, for 10 months during all of these paperwork proceedings that I was working with her attorney specifically to iron out the details of our divorce, there was never an allegation of abuse. So I filed for full custody of both of my kids. And then 4 days later, she goes and gets an ex parte order. What she stated in court is that I had been beating her once a month without fail on the 19th of the month. And that was over 144 beatings. So I had an incompetent lawyer that was fired 2 days after our restraining order hearing. But the one question he did ask her I believe he was being cynical, but he said, well, what happens if you miss the 19th? Does he give you 2 beatings on the 20th, or does it carry over to the next month, or how does that work? And she didn't have an answer for that. So the judge in the case asked my ex-wife, well, do you have any police reports? Do you have any hospital visits? Do you have any pictures? And so 144 beatings is a pretty significant amount of abuse that one would involve. Surely you would have some type of paperwork. And the answer to all of those was no. No, I don't have a police report. No, I've never been to the hospital. And no, I don't have any pictures. Well, then they offered up a picture. But it was this one bruise on her, I believe it was her left wrist. And you can literally see the IV puncture mark in the middle of the picture. So she had went and gotten an IV shot of some sort, and that was their claim that my ex-wife was abused. So the St. Louis County Circuit Judge told my ex-wife, I really don't believe what you're saying. And then never even skipped a breath and looked over at me and said, but to err on the side of caution, because divorces can be contentious, we're going to go ahead and grant this. It won't take that long to finish the litigation, and when the divorce is over, you'll have your custody time. This thing will be dismissed, and everybody can move on with their lives and be protected. So, believing in the judicial system at the time, I didn't know any better, and so that was the way it went.
Well, and hold on just a minute. So why didn't you file your own restraining order against her at the time?
I had actually tried. So when I was served with the paperwork, due to the fact that there was explicit sexual pictures taken of a 12-year-old minor, I had filed a paperwork. We were both granted the exact same court date, which was, I believe, June 22nd, 2015. And I was not granted a temporary ex parte, whereas
why?
I was given a court date that was
yeah. Well, why weren't you granted the ex parte?
I was just given a grant of a judicial court date, which was the exact same day that she had filed, stating all of this obviously insane, 144 beatings, and she was given the ex parte. I would have to assume that since we filed around the same time, and that one of us was given just a hearing date, and one of us was given an ex parte, that it would have to be based on the fact that I'm a man. So,
bingo. But go ahead.
So after that, what they did is that judge was moved from her division to another division, and they brought another judge in. So from the get-go, the second judge, I have an active ex parte against me. I'm labeled as a woman beater. I'm labeled as a child abuser, which, by the way, she had filed a secondary ex parte, which was for the children. And under Missouri state law, you have to reference an abuse or neglect of some type to the kids. But there was no abuse or neglect alleged against the kids. It was an exact replica of mothers. And so therefore, since it didn't have any allegations of child abuse or neglect against children, it shouldn't have been granted. And I would have to assume that the judge didn't even read it and just rubber stamped it.
Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting. So what would you have done differently, if anything, at that point?
Well, it gets better from there. I'll finish out the story, and then I'll tell you what I did, would have done differently. First of all, the lawyer was the issue because he didn't object to the right things and didn't ask the right questions. That's what I'm paying you for. I'm not a legal attorney. I don't know the questions to ask or the procedures, and so therefore, I don't know. I just don't know. I don't have the knowledge to do those things. But long story short, the ex-wife and her new attorney, so she fired her first attorney that was trying to amicably work through with me after the ex parte hearing, and got one of the most savage women rights attorneys in the St. Louis area. And they just strung it out for, I believe, 11 months after that. So it was 11 months before I seen my children again. And I believe I'm pretty sure it was 19 hearings. And I never met my second judge face to face. They always did everything in chambers. They were never out there in public to, be on the record or anything else. All the dealings were done behind the closed doors. So I should have fired my second attorney too, because he should have objected to that type of backdoor dealings. And on the day of the trial, they used the fact that I had not been actively involved in my children's life for 11 months.
Can you believe that? First of all, what the hell? How is that even legal? The court blocks you and then says, well, since you weren't involved, go to the punchline now. Go ahead.
The punchline is that they said after 11 months of being illegally blocked from my children, to err on the side of caution. So we bypassed the Constitution with that little sentence, to err on the side of caution. They use it against me to say that I was that the children were used to being and living with mom full time, and I was granted. Mind you, these children were with me every day for 13 years, and never one allegation of child abuse or anything like that. But after these hearings, at the final settlement, I was granted 36 hours every 2 weeks for a total of 72 hours unsupervised with my own children.
Yeah, because you're such a threat.
And so I would challenge that. If I'm such a threat that I can only be around my children 72 hours a month, what judge in their right mind that isn't off of their meds would put children around a human being for 72 hours?
It gets worse than that. I've talked to dads where somebody that his ex was going out with, would live in the house. Now, this ex hasn't been vetted. Nobody knows if he's a child molester or he beat his kids or what have you. He's got more time with your kids than you do. I'm not saying that was your situation, but I've seen this a lot, and I'm just like stunned by, you're judged improperly. It's obvious, but the person that the kids are spending more time with, the man acting as a pseudo father, has got them the rest of the time, is egregious. That's outrageous.
Yeah, it is. So I'm so dangerous that I can only spend 72 hours a month with my children. But if you and my ex-wife hook up, you can immediately, the day that you guys meet, you can move in with her and my children and spend unlimited amount of time with them. And you and I can just swap wives. I can move into your house and live with your children full time, but you can't be around your own children except for whatever the powers or whatever you're privileged to be granted from the courts that say so.
It's insanity. And, I know we'll get into this, but folks, it's all for money. It's going to boil down to money. We're going to get there in a little bit. Okay, so Kenneth, let's keep moving. So you had them for 72 hours a month, but sooner or later you lost them entirely. Can you walk us through what happened?
Well, we'll go to the money part. My ex-wife at the time on the settlement or trial paper. So on the day of the divorce, they presented us with a trial. I remember it because it was April 15th, the day that Uncle Sam's take all your money. And so we went to our final trial, and they do these settlement conferences back and forth. And my ex-wife, on her financial statements that year, she made $84,000. On my financial statements, I made $54,000. So that's a $30,000 discrepancy. Now, the fable or the lie, if you will, that they tell us is that child support is to equal out the houses to make them both similarly livable for the children so that they have the same residence type back and forth. But the problem is that when you take the $1,000 a month I was ordered to pay her, you take her from $84,000, put her up into the 90s, and you take me from the $54,000 and put me back down into the 30s. So, well, roughly about 30. So tell me again how moving her into a higher tax bracket, moving me into a lower tax bracket is equality for the housing situation for the children. It's absolutely not. But that being said, so after I get my 72 hours of granted privilege time from Her Majesty that I've never met face to face, I believe we were divorced 26 days, roughly thereabout, give or take a couple of days. It was not 30 days, but it was in the 20s. And I got served with my second restraining order. And my violation is that I sent flowers. Now, mind you, in my custody papers, it states that no communication in any form shall be blocked. Not phone, not contact, not anything. But the second restraining order filing was that I had sent flowers to my daughter at her school, which were delivered by a delivery person. And to my ex-wife, that was unacceptable. So
what judge would call that a violation of a restraining order? And by the way, the restraining order was bullshit. But what judge would ever say that was a violation?
Well, she didn't have as much success with that. So in Missouri, once the 72 hours was granted, her first restraining order was null and void. It can't interfere with parental time. So the second time she did that was 26 days later. And what it amounted to was that it took me about 6 or 7 months to litigate that. So mom can show up, her lawyer can stall it out. We can go to court. I can spend all these money. It cost me about $14,000 to litigate that for 7 months. And the attorney is I didn't know him at the time, but he's really good. So we go 7 months. I don't get to see my kids because under Missouri state law, you cannot have an ex parte or restraining order by state statute that changes custody time in any way. But while they're litigating it, the children can't be around me until the factors are proven or unproven.
Even if it's not for the kids? Was the restraining order about the kids?
Yes, because I had harassed my daughter by sending her flowers on her birthday to her school.
Okay, well, unbelievable. And at this point, was your attorney saying to sue her civilly? Because it seems like a civil violation of your, and an egregious one at that. Had you considered that at the time?
So she's what you call an excessive litigant. Once she walked in the day of the second restraining order. Once she walked in the day of the second restraining order, it took about 6-7 months to get it to court because they stalled out. She had to get an attorney. Then she wasn't ready. He wasn't ready, et cetera, et cetera. So we went to the day of the second restraining order trial, and mom walks in and waves her hand and says, "I'd just like to dismiss." Well, at that point, custody time resumed. So I would go 2-3 weeks max, and then mom would go down and file another one. Then it would take me 6 or 7 months to litigate that. We did that 4 times in a row.
What? And why didn't your attorney put an end to that by filing a vexatious litigant?
Somehow under Missouri statutes and law, you can't litigate an issue that isn't closed. So we would go to try and file for a modification or some type of a civil suit, and she would already have beaten us down to the courthouse to get paperwork filed, et cetera, et cetera. So what we were trying to do was establish the fact that I would get 1 or 2 weeks back with the children, and then, had resumed parental time so that she couldn't say that it had been years since I seen them. But for the better part of 5 years, I missed about 3 years of their time litigating out these restraining orders. And on the 4th one, the judge finally told her, if I see you back in here doing this again, it's going to be a problem. So she never did file another one after the judge put his foot down, but we should have done that 4 restraining orders ago and 3 years before I had missed out on the time with my kids. So out of 6 years now, we're now at 4 years I haven't seen my kids in any shape, form, or fashion.
Well, I'm trying to understand in those 4 years, could you, in hindsight, have done anything differently to change that situation? And what would you recommend you would have done?
So here's what I recommend. You go to the day of the trial. That was my first, well, the picking of my first attorney was my biggest fault, because he's just there for the money. He didn't care. And by the time that first restraining order got instated, it was never could catch up, because then that's just what they used against me. Well, you've had a restraining order against you. But going back to it, the day of the settlement, instead of signing that, they bring in these coercive terms. They force you. They're like, oh, you have to sign this. We're getting divorced today. This is it. And this is what I would recommend to all the fathers out there. Do not put your signature on the fact that they're taking your children from you.
Yeah.
Refuse to sign it. If they take your children from you anyway, they took your children from you. But at least you didn't put your okay and your stamp on the fact that your children are absent.
Totally, 100%. And your own attorney will be pressuring you because they're pieces of shit and don't sign it. Now, that didn't happen to me, fortunately, but sounds like it happened to you.
They did. It was, this is the final day. I didn't know my rights, that I didn't have to sign that. And that actually would have been my first trigger to an appeal, was the fact that I was signed under duress. But I didn't know that. So once I put my signature on it, well, now it's an agreeable document, even though it was signed under duress. And so therefore, I was granted by Her Majesty 72 hours a month with my own children.
Unbelievable.
Support for this podcast comes from KidsMatter.Charity, a nonprofit dedicated to fighting for kids' rights in difficult divorce situations. Donate at KidsMatter.Charity to help them restore common sense to the family courts.
Okay, so let's keep going. So how did you lose your kids? I'm sorry, you lost your kids because of all the restraining order nonsense and that they just dragged it out for 4 years. But I'm not aware that you've gotten them back yet. Is that true? I
have not. So that dragged on for 4 years. There was a 36-month period from 2016, when we finally got divorced on April 15th, up until 2019. There was about a 36-month period that I had a DFS worker. And if it wasn't a DFS worker, it was a sheriff's department deputy or some type of a police department or some type of excessive litigation being served against me that I was always having to go to court for and litigate. I spent tens of thousands of dollars doing that. And so the point to that is that you can keep a father pushed out just by excessively litigating them. So when I ended up, after mom did all of this, the sheriff's department wasn't willing at first to take police reports, if you will, or sheriff's department reports for interference with parental custody. In Missouri, there are You sign a agreement, your divorce settlement, that you will abide by with your other co-parent, and that is a contract. In Missouri, there are penalties if you do not abide by that contract. You can be prosecuted under criminal state statutes for not paying child support. But there are also laws on the book for interference with custody. And so for the longest time, I couldn't get the sheriff's department to even take reports. Well, I started learning my homework and doing the work. And so I threatened to sue the sheriff's department for whatever it was at the time. And so I went down and I filed a formal written complaint with the sheriff's department, and they actually started taking the police reports or sheriff's department reports for interference with custody. They took 46 of them in the process of about a year and a half, I would say. There was one December that they had 4 Class D felonies sitting on the county prosecutor's desk for interference with custody against my ex, and they refused to prosecute. They told me that there wasn't a pattern that they could prove in court for her interfering with my custody, which would have been 4 felonies on her record, while I was having to pay child support. So I have to honor my side of the agreement. She doesn't have to honor hers.
Why did you honor it, though?
I always thought that maybe she would come around, or
Well, don't you think she came around if you stop paying? That makes them come around, doesn't it?
nah, not for her, because like I said, she has her own money. She's not broke by any means. She's just a hateful human being, and she uses her children for control. And so I always thought that, she would just give up and do that, but I think it kind of fed into it. So that being said, from her gaining all this power and being able to excessively litigate, and the prosecuting attorney not enforcing the laws of Missouri to protect its citizen and my 2 children, she showed up on Christmas Eve of 2018. I had taken my son to the mall, and he disappeared. So they couldn't find him for like a couple of hours, and they were getting ready to issue an Amber Alert. And it turns out Mom had stopped at the mall. She was working with my son and picked him up and disappeared with him. So once they found out that custodial Mom had him, then they refused to issue the Amber Alert or prosecute her, even though it met all criteria for it to be a parental kidnapping in the state of Missouri.
Yeah, I mean, why don't you have a? I just read case law on this, but there was a case where they went after the DA and the cops for not executing something about your constitutional right to. There was a few things. They sued successfully, and they won a civil case against the police and DA for not doing their jobs. Essentially, had you thought about doing that?
So that wraps up the end of the story. After he disappeared in 2018, I went 732 days without seeing my son. I finally, Christmas of this year, 2020. So for 3 Christmases, but 2 years, he showed up with my oldest daughter. The minute my oldest daughter turned 18, and Mom doesn't have control over as much. I see her not every weekend, but it's pretty damn close. And so she showed up for Christmas, and I look at the door, and my son, he wasn't as tall as me the last time I seen him, walks through the door, and he's now about 4.5 inches taller than me.
And because your daughter, who was 18, brought him, and she basically said, let's go.
Because my daughter, who was 18, Mom doesn't have the control over her that she did when she turned 18. She said, that's my dad. You did him shitty. I'm going to see him. If you don't like it, I guess we just won't have a relationship together. So Mom still has a lot of control in that situation because she still lives with Mom at 18. But yeah, so for the first time in 3 Christmases, I got to see him this year. So I was very thankful I got to spend the 3 hours with him. But
what was that reunion like, Ken?
It was very emotional, but for the first time in 3 Christmases, it was tears of joy instead of pain, despair, and sorrow.
Yeah. And all because the court system failed you, and so did the police and DA.
Yeah, so it starts with the police. They complain or gripe that they have to take a police report, and then they tell you, when we file these with the prosecuting attorney, they're not going to do shit with them. So why are you wasting our time? And I said, because I need those to go back to court. So that being stated, in February of 2019, I filed for full custody of both children. Mind you, one was 15 at the time, and this was 2 months after she had kidnapped him from the mall. And we filed all of the reasons that I was seeking full custody. And here's how these courts work. Under Missouri state law, the state statute says, if I file for custody or a modification thereof, and the reason why I filed is that you have moved without giving proper notice, which is 60 days certified mail, that you are required to pay all legal fees on all sides because you're the reason why I'm having to file. There were 7 counts in 5 years. This is the stable parent. There was 7 counts of moving without notifying me of what address they were moving to. She moved them all over the county. They moved 2 or 3 different schools and all of that stuff. So that's why I filed the modification. And we walk in and the judge is looking at the papers. Now, under Missouri state law, since I was the respondent, even though that case was settled in 2016, when I refiled in 2019, I always stay the respondent. So the judge knows you're a loser. When you walk in, they treat you as such. And even though it says under state law that she's supposed to file or she's supposed to pay for the filings and legal fees, he automatically assigns me a new JAL and tells me I have to pay for everything. Well, don't you even know the laws that are in your courts?
Oh, they don't. Look, they don't need to. You know this better than I do. They don't follow them. They don't need to follow them, and nobody holds them accountable. So why should they follow them? It's whatever they're feeling that day.
I think so too, and I think that.
Well, I've seen it, and I know many, 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 many others that I've talked to, and it's not just guys. I'd say 10% of it's women too. It's not just men, but these judges. First of all, when you try to appeal, you go through that game with family court. I mean, I just think the appellate court just shuts it down because they don't want anything to do with it. But it does count when you put all those, usually the writs at the end of the divorce. You have a very good case for a good appeal if it doesn't go your way. But it's a big game, and you were caught up in the game, didn't know how to play it better than the opposing side, and look what happened. And now your kids have been impacted.
So just so everyone is aware how much they were impacted, and this is not a slight. My daughter is 18. She's extremely bright. She's very pretty. She could be a model if she wanted to. Just so they know how much she was impacted. She lived with mom all those years going through high school, and she graduated with a 1.012 GPA average.
Jeez. Because of the stress and
all the time sick, now that I've studied these things and you get to learning about parental alienation, a few of the signs that these kids can actually make themselves sick with is you always have stomach problems, you always have constipation, and you have like headaches and things of that nature. My daughter was always complaining of those things when she was going to school. And so she had those things. So that behavior or those results are what the family courts allowed. Everybody wants to argue, well, if your other parent wasn't encouraged or wasn't, doing that stuff, the family courts, no. I fully hold the family courts accountable because her behavior got worse every time she violated those papers. And she realized she wasn't going to be held accountable to the standard that I was for the child support side of it. And so it just kept getting worse and worse and worse up to the point that she kidnapped him and nothing still happened to her. So.
Of course not. So it just encourages that attorney for the next female that they represent to do the exact same thing. So it gets the system is the reason why it gets worse and worse and worse and costs all of us tens or hundreds or millions of dollars depending on your case. The system, and I did more research on this, and the system itself is a for-profit center. So, oh my God. If everyone is making money within the system and the longer a divorce takes and the more it's dragged out and the more things that you're allowed to do to one another legally makes more money for the system and the attorneys and the players involved, well, look at the incentives. The incentives now are structured to screw you. And the smart attorneys are doing just that. I don't know too many attorneys that look at the process as not being adversarial. The process is adversarial. You're going through the worst time in your life, and you have to enter an adversarial process and an adversarial system. This is a scam. It's a total scam. I don't know your thoughts on it, Kenneth.
It is a scam. And in between my ex-wife and I, we have spent, in between the two of us, litigating and going back and forth, and me fighting for my right to see my children, caused by this adversarial system. We've spent well over $500,000 going back and forth, just for me to try and be a father to my own two children that I was perfectly acceptable for, up until I filed for full custody. And then all of a sudden I was this monster, and that's what the courts made me out to be. And I never could get past that. So, back to the kids, not to go too far back, but the impacts on my son is that we know that when children don't have their father in their lives, they become aggressive. And so my son spent 36 days kicked out of his freshman year, 20 days kicked out of his sophomore year, and has been kicked out of his junior year this year for 10 days for fighting. So I guess he's pretty aggressive because his father's been removed from his life, and the family courts won't help in any shape, form, or fashion to protect them.
They don't care. That's not what it's about for them.
But they've scarred that child for life because those are permanent records.
Oh, I know.
That anyone else can look at now and think that he has a behavioral disorder or that he's mentally unstable or some type of employment. And so he's extremely bright, way above average IQ, but now people are going to be looking at his permanent records because his father was missing and nobody cares.
Yeah. Well, and it's nobody pays attention to that. The stats have been out there for a long time. The judges know it. The attorneys know it. They don't care. And this is my big problem with it. And this is why I think family courts need to go away. And it needs to be more of a system like Sweden, where, only 3% of divorces end up in court. And there's very specific reasons why.
Well, yeah, let me finish wrapping up this same judge.
Of course.
The same judge that didn't know that mom's required to pay for the legal fees. This same judge ordered reunification counseling. Now, I would like to know, under what authority do you have to change that contract, as I've never agreed to that. She didn't agree to that. She just won't abide by it. So you come in and you change a legal binding settlement offer and just make it your own. Ordered reunification counseling. They also put a stipulation in there, which was unbelievable, that if mom did not bring the child to reunification counseling, that she would go to jail. After 3 times of not bringing the child to reunification counseling, the judge entered a second order that said, we'll just go back to the way that the parental time was before mom kidnapped the child.
Of course.
And so I still didn't get this.
They not penalize the mom, not take the kids. Some judges I've seen, to be fair, take the kids away from the mom that's doing that and gives them to the dad. And now she's penalized for 6 months to a year, but it's so rare.
Yeah, after he made the second order that we would go back to the same parental time, that was a couple of, I think she skipped 3 visits on the reunification counseling. My son showed up for 1 visit he stayed for 16 minutes, told the counselor he didn't have to listen to my bullshit, got up and left. And then after that, they ordered 4 more reunification counseling things before our trial, which is actually this month. But here's the problem. They've stalled this out so long that I filed in 2019 that my son will be 17 in March of this year. And therefore, under state law, he's not legally able to sign a contract, but he's legally able to live anywhere he wants. My daughter timed out. She was 16 when I filed these papers, and now she's 18. I have no say-so in that. So basically, my children were stolen by a vindictive, crazy, well, I won't say crazy. She's not crazy. She's just vindictive. A vindictive ex that used the system to domestically violence. Let's put it in terms that people can understand.
Yeah.
I was domestically violenced by an ex-wife that I don't even live with through my children.
Yeah. I couldn't, according to that definition, their definition, domestic violence could be anything, including giving flowers to your daughter at school. I want to talk about why you didn't appeal any of this stuff and why you didn't, file contempt motions and stuff like that along the way when you weren't able to see your kids. Did you know that was a remedy? Was it just, was it frowned upon? What was going on?
Okay, so for the appeal part of it, I have to have a judgment. I have to have a say-so from this judge that I filed in February 2019, and here we go into
you could file a writ.
23 months later. Well, they're using the COVID excuse as to why we can't get in there and litigate. So they're hiding behind that. And so I have to have a judgment in order to seek redress in an appeal or something above that. As far as that, one of those 3 restraining orders that she got me hit by. So this is the things that a lot of people, one of the 4 extra restraining orders that she filed in the last, after the divorce. That's after the divorce. The Division of Family Services, or CPS, whichever you refer to, there was a criminal charge that was issued. There was an ex parte off of mom's say-so, and I was criminally charged. They couldn't make that stick. I actually had to get a lawyer. I had to go to court. I had to beat a misdemeanor assault charge against one of my children. We beat that. We got the ex parte dismissed. And then the Division of Family Services comes out, talks to mom, talks to the kid, comes out and talks to me. They don't even have to hold a hearing. They held a hearing while this COVID stuff is going on that I was not present at. And they put you on a registry that now states in the state of Missouri, I am a child abuser because mom said so. So not only do I have a trial in January, mind you, we've been divorced since 2016, and I just want to be an equal parent to my kids and see my kids. I have a trial in January to finish out this custody if I do win full custody, which you would have to be off of your meds to say I shouldn't be. I have a trial sometime this year where I have subpoenaed and sued 14 of the Division of Family Services workers for hiding this registry and putting me on it. And I have another trial sometime this year for other issues that are involving that. So that being said, to round back around to your thing, there is 23 litigants involved in a suit. So we'll call it a class action suit, if you will, against 23 of my ex-wife and her co-conspirators, including, and I was very good at leaving a paper trail. So when the prosecutor wouldn't file those 4 Class D felonies against mom for parental interference and things of that nature, I filed a written complaint with the Attorney General of Missouri. So I've left a very good paper trail over the last 5 years, and there will be litigation coming in 2021. But if I win $100 million, if I win $10 trillion, it does not make up the 5 years that I've lost with my kids.
Of course, you wouldn't trade that.
And it does not make up the fact that they will spend the rest of their lives healing from the insanity they've been placed in.
And it is insanity. It will impact them the rest of their life. And it's all because of a system that's incentivized by money and not doing the right thing by families. It should be a family reunification court, whether reunification means you and the kids or, you and your ex-wife. In most cases, that can't happen, which is fine, but it shouldn't be an adversarial system, which is incentivized by money, which is the primary problem. We didn't even get into Title 4D and all that. But so, Kenneth, I think this was a great discussion. Do you have any causes or anything that you want to talk about before we get off?
So that being said, I joined up. Through pain comes growth, and I joined up with the Father's Rights Movement. People ask me how I do so much with them. I answer the inbox for them. I do most of the posts on the central page. I do a live every week with them with different guests and different things. As a matter of fact, I believe you're scheduled to be on with us sometime later this month. But through pain comes change. So we have to realize that there's 24, they say in between 21 to 26 million fathers that haven't seen their child in over a year. That's a stat I never wanted to be placed in. I was placed there by the family court governments. And that's unacceptable to me. So until that's fixed, I'm not going to stop until every father has their child back in their life that should have their child in their life, because I was a fit, willing, and able, loving father, and still am to this day. And that's why my kids love me, even though they were kept from me by their mother in the courts.
Yeah, and that's a stat. That's an interesting stat because I've done a lot of research. It is true. And the feedback I get from the women in the women's rights movement, because I talk to them too, I understand their position, is that, okay, that's fine, that's not fine, but how many of those dads are unwilling, that don't want anything to do with their kids? And I can't answer that because, I don't have the stats on that. So if it is, if it's the numbers that high, what percent of those people do you think are unwilling, those fathers unwilling to be associated with their kids, do you think?
So we don't have stats on that. We don't have stats on how many of the 22 veterans a day that kill themselves are because of family courts. Now, I've talked to military counselors that can't get into, because of HIPAA and things like that, but they say 7 out of 10 that come to see them for counseling are because family court issues, whether that be the girlfriend left them when they got home, they can't see their kids, whatever. So that's 70%. And then we have stats that say that roughly about 19 fathers a day kill themselves because of the courts. So that's 34 and a half dads a day that kill themselves because they can't see their kids. We now have the stats that say about 60% of all kids that suicide are because they don't have access to their fathers. So we don't have the tracking mechanisms to say how many of those 21 to 26 million fathers are, I hate the term, but the classic quote unquote deadbeat dads, because we don't track those type of things. I did read a stat that said that the average father will try about 3 years. So they'll go through this process, and after about 3 years of just hitting stonewall after stonewall, they can't keep up. They can't emotionally deal with it. They can't financially deal with it. After about 3 years, they just give up. I absolutely refuse to believe the 25 million fathers in this country don't want something to do with their kids.
Yeah, I mean, that's the story that the press never tells is, well, let's dig into why and go interview them. Well, a lot of times is they've been alienated, or, there's been some family court issue with the crazy judge, and there's a lot of them, or there's some issue that the mom's playing like she's doing with you. And I would love to dive more into that. I don't even know where to begin with something like that. But I would put it, I'd say maybe 20% of those dads that you're citing have nothing to, they don't want anything to do with their kids because it was a mistake, or, they're just bad guys and they don't want anything to do with their kids. But my belief is 80% of them want to be in their kids' lives, and for whatever reason have been stopped from being in their kids' lives. And it's not the same with mothers. And if we're for equality in marriage, divorce, and life, then that is a clear proof that there is inequality, and there's not enough people outside of these fathers that are fighting for it, unfortunately.
I agree. I would value it some, I see 600,000 people a month comments, correspondence with the fathers' rights movements and things of that nature. So I would value it somewhere around 80%. But then I'm going to throw out the other side of the coin. There's 20% of mothers that don't want nothing to do with their kids too. So let's quit shaming dads for wanting to be active roles, or those, sometimes you just can't force a parent to do what's right. Most parents want to do what's right, and they want to be equals if the relationship breaks down. So with that being said, I could fix family court in 2 or 3 steps, and we wouldn't have all this insanity.
Yeah. What would you do? Just curious.
First of all, I'd kill the Title 4D mechanism, because that's the funding that creates this I mean, if you can't go in there and say that I have been gladiatored and killed by the lions in this arena, you're out of your mind. I mean, there's been so many hardships and craziness to it. So let's eliminate the money problem to it. Number 1. Number 2, let's start with the 50-50 rebuttable presumption in every court. Are there dads that don't want to be there? Yep, but there's just as many moms. Are there dads that are abusive? Yep, for every story you bring me of a dad abusing or killing his kids, I can bring you one for a mom. So there are parents. We can't play both sides. Let's give kids a 50-50 start, and let's work backwards from there. Sometimes it won't work. If parents agree that dad lives on the other side of the state and he wants the kids for the summer and every other weekend, as long as they both agree to it, I'm okay with that. And number 3, let's stop hiding behind the fact that this isn't anything but money gain for the states. It's big business, big business. And so children are suffering for it.
Okay. My solution would be quicker, easier. I would just say adopt Sweden's model. And everyone knows when you get divorced, this is what happens. There's no argument. And if you want to go to court, you've got to have, I think there's 3 reasons. And if it's not one of those 3, you don't get access to the court. You have to do it the way the law spells out. I think that's easy, gets rid of all these problems. Kids are spared going through something that they didn't choose to go through. And I just think overall, Sweden's a very happy society, and their system's far better than ours in terms of that. Agreed.
So if you have 80% of all dads that want to be there, and instead of going to court and getting a paycheck and the kids, if you're a female, that if you split up with your partner, they're going to get their child 50% of the time, and that's the way it works. Would we have as many divorces as we have in this country? I don't think we would. I think parents would find a way to work it out. I think parents would find a way to seek counseling. There are stats out there that even say that parents that co-parent and share their children 50% of the time, that mom has time to go back to school, get a higher education. Parents that co-parent, there's a study out there that states that women can make 6 figures. You're trading in a $600 a month child support check when you could be trading in a 6-figure a year salary. That you're getting the short end of the stick, ladies. Equal shared parenting is the way.
There's just too much pressure from some of these women's groups that don't see it that way, and no matter what you tell them, they'll never see it that way, and it's really a shame. But another topic for another day.
Absolutely.
And really appreciate you being on the show.
Hey, I appreciate you so much. And anytime you need something from the Father's Rights Movement, you have it. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Kenneth.
Thanks again for tuning in. A reminder that we are not attorneys and this is not legal advice. We advise you to do the research yourself or to contact an attorney you trust. There are very few of them. This was Divorce Matters Podcast.